Good evening and welcome to the 8th installment of the Adult Webinar Series. My name is Amethyst Johnson Creeke and I am the Manager of Information and Referral Services here at the Tourette Association of America. For those of you that are tuning in for the first time, allow me to give you a brief overview of the work that we do here at the TAA. Our mission is to better the lives of individuals affected by Tourette Syndrome and tic disorders. The TAA works to raise awareness, advance research, and to provide ongoing support through our centers of excellence, chapters, and support groups nationwide. Tonight, I am joined by Dr. Kompoliti and Eric McGowan, who will be discussing the details of navigating a romantic relationship when one or both of the partners is diagnosed with Tourette syndrome. Dr. Kompoliti is the Educational Director of Movement Disorders, as well as the Director of Movement Disorders Fellowship and Centers of Excellence on Tourette Syndrome and tic disorders at Rush University Medical Center. She is an accomplished author, as well as an experienced principal investigator in research focused on therapeutic areas, including studies to evaluate the safety and efficacy of new compounds to treat Tourette syndrome, Parkinson's disease, functional movement disorders, and dystonia. Eric has a bachelor's degree as a Bachelor of Science in Acoustics from Columbia College in Chicago and a Master of Arts in Architecture from the University of Kansas. He first became involved with the Tourette Association's Southern California chapter in late 2016 and joined the board of directors in March of 2018. Eric is passionate about helping those living with Tourette syndrome through advocacy, organization, and attendance of the chapter events. And as director of Camp George, a sleepaway camp for youth with Tourette syndrome and their families. And before we kick off this webinar, I just want to remind all of the viewers to please submit their questions to the questions section, which is on the bottom right of the screen. The presenters will be answering the questions during the Q&A session at the end of this presentation. Dr. Kompoliti?
Yes. Hello, I'm Katie Kompoliti, and I'm a movement disorders neurologist at Rush University Medical Center in Chicago. And a big part of what I do is seeing patients with Tourette's and tic disorders, both adults and children. Next one, please. So tonight, we are going to spend the next hour or so discussing how to navigate romantic relations for patients with Tourette's and tic disorders. So we start with some definitions, and just feel free to ignore the difficult words on the left if you want. And the only reason I can pronounce them is because I'm Greek, and a lot of them are Greek. But there are different types of love. There are different ways we love and seek love. One is eros, which is the passion and madness, which is most people confuse as the only kind of love in a romantic relationship. In the Greek myth, it is the form of madness brought about by one of Cupid's arrows. The arrow breaches the person, and they fall in love, as did Paris with Helen. Philia is a friendship, love that's based on friendships. Storge is a love that's based on fondness, born out of familiarity or dependency. It's the familiar love. Agape is selfless love. It's like, let's say, the love of a mother for their child. Ludus is the playful, uncommitted love. That's the flirtatious type of love. Pragma is the pragmatic love, the love founded on reason and duty is the practical love. And philotia is the love for oneself, which is something we should all practice to some degree, because if you do it in excess, then you approach what we call hubris. Next one, please. So what do people long for? We all long for intimacy, we long for social connection, and we long for sexual relations. Next one, please. And we try to find the person that's going to fulfill all these dreams, if you will. And what influences our partner selection has to do with our self-identity. How do we perceive ourselves? The similarities we see in other people, and the proximity of their beliefs to ours. And to some degree, social class influences how people choose each other, religious preferences, ethnic identity, and racial identity. All this to different degrees for different people. Next one, please. So what happens when we see somebody and we feel that little thing that tells us that, oh, that could be a person I could be with. That's the attraction. That's at that point, there's no interaction. Then we proceed to what we call invitational communication, where we actually take a chance and we kind of reveal ourselves to the other side. And then we start sharing information, and that's called explorational communication. And we're going to focus a lot on those two stages because I think a lot of times may be the most uncomfortable for people with Tourette's, or at least they perceive they're the most uncomfortable. And then as you figure it out and you hit it off, you get into that point where we call intensifying communication. That's the happy stage, the high, the relation high. And then things eventually always settle down and we start revising our communication. We are starting to develop the realistic perspective on the relationship. And then at some point, people, if they stay together, they start looking at the future together. They start making joint decisions about the future, and that's the stage of commitment. And then you become that old couple where you change and you evolve and you grow together and you grow apart and you start navigating the relationship, reflecting on the changes of needs of each person that's part of the relationship. And that's the last part, is the one that requires the most work, as those of us who've been married or in long-term relationships know. So what we said we're going to deal with tonight is we're going to try to dissect how dating and pursuing romantic relationships is different for adults with Tourette syndrome. What are the challenges and limitations? We're going to focus quite a bit on disclosure and explanation of symptoms. We are going to touch upon the fact that how socio-emotional experiences from the family and peers influence dating by influencing who we are and how we perceive ourselves and others. And maybe we're going to point out some of the helpful factors for Tourette's patients in navigating dating, because there's always the other side of the story. Next one, please. So there is very, very little research on what are the specifics, what are the differences on dating and romantic relationships in Tourette syndrome. And there are very few reports. One of them dates back to the late 80s, where some person doctor named Champion interviewed 210 adults with Tourette's and found that almost half of them reported problems with dating as a result of having Tourette's, but he didn't explore the nature of these problems. On thinking about that, most of us feel that the problems have to do with the stigma and fear of rejection, with the hesitation on exposing one's tics, and with the possible limited opportunities to develop the social skills involved in dating as a consequence of growing up with Tourette's. Next slide, please. So because for some people with Tourette's, growing up may have had to do with bullying or exclusion from certain social circles, which can lead to loss of opportunities to develop social skills. And dating is just another social skill. You have to practice it, to learn it, to feel comfortable within it. And some of the things can result in impaired social and emotional learning. As Eric is going to tell you, Tourette's by itself is not a social disability, but some of the experiences that people live growing up can lead into social or emotional problems. Next one, please. And then it's that big thing of lack of self-confidence. Is the fact that, you know, and people with Tourette's are not the only ones. We all have a problem with conquering self-doubt. And that would go down the spiral of fear, stress, anxiety, insecurity, and conflict, rather than going up that the ladder or the spiral of being real, questioning things, learning, being self-aware, curious, and be brave enough to expose ourselves, which is part of the foundation of every relationship. Next one, please. So tics shape experiences, perceptions, and interactions with the environment, but the associated comorbidities may compound and alter this relationship. And I'm not going to spend too much time talking about how depression can lead to social withdrawal and difficulty seeking relationships, including romantic relationships, or how anxiety can hinder these connections you can make with other people, or how ADHD can make you unfocused and distract you from bringing relationships to fulfillment. But the point is that tics and comorbid conditions sometimes may interact and result in a vicious cycle. Next one, please. And we always think, at least the people I've talked to, that they believe that it's all about the tics. It's the tics that create the emotional dysregulation, impact emotional regulation and social functioning. But as a matter of fact, emotional regulation can impact both tic severity and social functioning. And that's something we can learn to have control on. And that's a thought I want people to take with them tonight, how we can achieve that mindfulness, that non-judgmental awareness of the environment that can help us, see other people around us for what they are and be able to approach them easier. Next one, please. So I said I'm not going to deal with depression or anxiety or ADHD, but I'm going to just spend a few minutes on OCD, on obsessiveness. Sometimes the obsessions can be, people can be really embarrassed by the obsessions. And it has been shown that the severity of obsessions negatively correlates with emotional, social, sexual, intellectual, and recreational intimacy. Next one, please. So obsessions can be difficult to share. They create sometimes shame because they're so hidden and deeply embedded or in our thoughts and on what we are. It can create embarrassment and fear of rejection. And this can be difficult to share because this a lot of times is perceived as disturbing by the individual who is having the obsessive thoughts. So that can be a big problem in, exposing yourself to others and starting relationships with others. Next one, please. But, that brings us to the biggest point of tonight's talk, and that's disclosure. And we are sitting there with somebody across from us in the table, sipping on wine, and we have the elephant sitting on the table too. There is an elephant in the room, and whether we prefer to talk about it, the elephant or not, the elephant is there, and we have to address the elephant in the room. And next one, please. So the different aspects of disclosure is, first of all, is whether do we really have to disclose? Why, when, how, or what? Next one, please. So whether depends on the question that is it worth it? And is it worth it depends on whether there is a potential for long-term relationship. If you feel that the other side is worth your time and you see that going far, then you start thinking more about disclosing. And also depends on tic severity. If your tics are easy to hide, at least temporarily during a dinner date, then it makes it less worth it, at least at that time where you're facing the other person. And you can postpone it, I guess. At least you think you can postpone it. But then if the relationship becomes more serious, then you start seeing your life together, then you start thinking about things like the genetic risk of offsprings and things like that, and starting a family. And that's a big factor that determines the whether you should disclose or not. Next one. Then why? Why should you disclose? There is this sense of obligation or duty to be honest that most of us have. And that's the foundation of every relationship that can flourish and last. There is also the why depends again on the degree of ability to conceal, how severe the tics are and how good you are in concealing them. But most of the time, I think what prevails in most people is the negative impact you perceive that the non-disclosure may have on the relationship further down the road. Then some people argue, why not? Why there is the implicit fear of rejection or humiliation or the mental draining or emotional energy involved in disclosing. And the anticipation of discomfort you see across from you at the table on the other person that's sitting there. And maybe it's not real discomfort, but it's something that a lot of people have learned to anticipate when they disclose something like their tics, for example. Next one, please. So when do you disclose? And I've said that many times already, that you disclose when the relationship has a potential for the future. You do disclose easier when there is a certain degree of trust and closeness in the relationship. Then when the tic severity is, severe enough that doesn't allow you to ignore the elephant in the room. And then there is always a personality variability. You just not everybody handles these things the same way. And, that's what's wonderful about human beings, that we are all different in the way we handle things, and that's okay. Next one, please. So how do you disclose? The best way is probably to use natural openings in the conversation. Or, you cough and somebody asks, oh, what's wrong with you? And then you just grab that opportunity to elaborate on it the right way, just grab it and run with it. Or some people prefer to rely on a third party so they don't see the impact of the disclosure. Having a friend talk to the other person. And all is okay, you know, there's no right or wrong, you know, whatever works is fine. And then next one, please. And then it's the what. How much do you say? You don't need to say the whole story, or maybe people won't understand the whole story. And, you know, maybe it's too much for other people to grasp. So maybe you can give them a little bit at a time. So that's also something that depends on the circumstances, depends on who you are, who the other person is, and uh, what stage you are in the relationship. But grab that opportunity and just say a little bit. And that's an opening you can use to elaborate later on. Next one, please. And you know, there are a lot of problems with disclosure. One is that Tourette's can be a poorly understood disorder. And if you look at the social media and the popular media, there is an exotic presentation of what Tourette's is. And that's not true, but you know, it's up to you to explain that. And tics draw attention. Sometimes that can make people uncomfortable, and they increase self-awareness. But again, you know, we have to do what we have to do. There's this shame and embarrassment. And there is also this thing that the tics a lot of times are perceived as voluntary. You know, remember this, your second grade teacher who kept saying, why can't you stop doing that? Even though, you know, a lot of people, you know, your parents had told her, maybe, you know, an advocate had told her this is not voluntary, Mrs. Smith. But, you know, she keeps, people have a tendency to perceive tics a lot of times, at least part of them as voluntary. But then there's always the perceived strengthening of a relationship after disclosure. And you never forget that. Next one, please. Then, so then at that point, and usually that's in the beginning, during the explorational communication, you have to weigh what's harder for you. Is the emotional energy required for disclosure, or the emotional draining involved in concealing your tics in front of the other person? That doesn't allow you a lot of times to be yourself. Next one, please. And as I said before, there is a relationship between the experiences with important others in childhood and adolescence, our family and the people who loved us, and the expectations we have from others when we grow up, and how we believe other people view us. You know, if we've grown up with the notion that we are wonderful and people should love us, you know, even though we have our little quirks, then we grow up and go out there and expect people to love us. But not everybody has that. You know, you can't change your family. Don't choose your family. So we have, if you have it, you're lucky. But if you don't, you have to create that. You know, you have to find those friends through whose reflection you can start appreciate yourself more. Next one. But people with Tourette's can do well in romantic relationships. And now I've seen it in my clinic time and time again. I've seen people coming in with significant others, and they bring them to meet me after they get engaged. Then they come with them later, periodically through their married life. And those people who do well are the ones who use creativity or humor to their advantage. And those who can focus on things they're good, things they enjoy doing. And never reduce yourself to a single story. There's a danger of reducing ourselves, every one of us, to a single story. You're much more than your Tourette's or your tics. And we're much more than a single attribute of our story. There is no single story for anyone. Next one, please. I don't know what the composition of the audience is, but then there is some advice for people who date those with Tourette's. Try to keep things light. Ignore the stuff that can be ignored. Know that tics are involuntary. There is a top layer of voluntary control, and that's what we capitalize for behavioral modification treatments. But Tourette's is a neurobiological disorder, and most of what you see is involuntary. Have a sense of humor, make it clear that it's safe to communicate, take note of triggers so you don't waste your good time responding to triggers that can make the tics worse. And do not try to fix the other person. Maybe you won't like them if you fix them. There is a reason that you're there with them, right? Next one, please. And since I've gone down the road of advice, even more advice, this time for the people who with Tourette's, take the opportunity offered to you next time you tic. That's an opening for disclosure. Provide as much or as little information as the person's reaction seems to require. Don't overwhelm them. A joke or two can come in handy. Talk about it. Sometimes role playing before you go out on a date may help. Lower your stress level. Play your strengths. Again, none of us is a single story. Remember, you're a person first, and you're much more than your Tourette's. Next one. And then when you go out there and you're confused, lost, unsure, perplexed, and disoriented, next one. Just remember, if they are the right person for you, they will accept you no matter what. And if they don't, they're not the right person for you. Next one, please. And it always takes two to do the tango. Next one. And in every relationship, one side reveals and the other side listens, and the understanding is somewhere in the middle. And those roles change. We swap those roles throughout building every relationship. Next one, please. And as the Rolling Stones said, was what did they say? When the heart is on fire, smoke gets in the eyes. And then when you get to that point, maybe the tics don't matter as much. And next one, please. That's all I have to say. And I'm gonna pass the baton to Eric.
Hey everyone, my name's Eric McGowan. I'm on the board of directors for the Southern California chapter of the Tourette Association. And I am a 30-year-old man with Tourette's. You'll hear some tics like that and maybe some other things. So you can go to the next slide, please. Maybe click one more time. So yeah, just a few thoughts before we start. So just like our daily lives, all of us living with Tourette syndrome, relationships are tough. Relationships with anyone's friends, family are tough, but romantic relationships can be especially tough for some of us. Successful relationships take effort and practice for everyone. It's not just us with Tourette's or those of us with OCD or depression. It's everyone, neurotypical or otherwise. And it can be hard. You don't want to let failures discourage you. I've talked about this in my social and family relationships talk. Everything takes practice when it comes to developing relationships. And I just want to let you know that my focus today is going to be more on tics and less on co-occurring conditions, because I think tics are the one thing that most of us can't hide and is on display, pretty much from the beginning. So we're going to focus on that mostly. Next slide, please. So what are the challenges for everybody? General insecurities, mental and physical. It can be anything, height, weight, but also Tourette's, OCD, anything, mental and physical, everybody has insecurities. Most people are pretty good at imagining the worst case scenario. For us, a lot of us, the number one thing is, we won't be accepted because of our Tourette's, something we can't control. And then that leads into the, the obvious fear of rejection. Next slide, please. So what makes us different than everyone else? As I was kind of just saying, our insecurity or one of them is something that's on display most of the time. Suppressing can only go so far. If you're like me, you're not going to have the luxury of, waiting until a relationship is ready to move to the next level when I disclose, because it's something they're going to see within, the first 5 or 10 seconds of meeting with me. And just as Dr. Kompoliti said, tics aren't mainstream. They're not often understood. Tourette's in general really isn't, and a lot of other mental health issues. So they often just won't know what they're looking at. Why is his face twitching? Why is, are all these things happening? It's just it's a lesser known condition compared to a lot of those out there. But we have thick skin, but I'd like to say we have a unique type of thick skin. We have to, like I was saying, our thing is on display all the time, especially growing up. You're more prone to comments, rude comments, and then, it could be awkward encounters or bad encounters, even as you go into adulthood, when you have to develop this kind of thick outer layer. We all do. It's just something we live with. Next slide, please. So if it were in person, I'd ask you all, who's had an awkward interaction because of something they can't control. And this would go out to anyone. It's like everyone in the world who's pursued a romantic relationship, pretty much everyone has, or they will. Everybody's had this. It could be, anything can make a situation awkward. It doesn't just have to be Tourette's. There's tons of things. You drop something on you during a dinner date. It could be you trip while you're taking a long walk. It could be anything. But for us, so who has friends and loved ones who can look past your TS? I think most of us do. And you'll realize when you get into dating and romantic relationships that this applies to romantic partners as well. It can often be surprisingly easy and almost weird to see how quickly Tourette's, your tics are no longer any sort of issue at all. Next slide, please. So our biggest hurdle, and what I really want to focus on, how do I tell someone I'm interested in dating that I have Tourette syndrome? And I say this is the biggest hurdle because, like I was saying before, I can't hide my tics for more than a few seconds. And so that either is, I've just now met this person and they're going to see it, or, I've met them and been talking with them through text or online, which we'll get to, and they're going to see it as soon as they do meet me. So how do we go about this? Next slide, please. So I borrowed from Dr. Kompoliti's section. Let's see, I think there might be one more on there. I want to focus almost entirely on disclosure, because I think for us, once we get into a relationship, the extent of our Tourette's is either they've already witnessed it, they already know what's going on, they know what to expect, or they've at least got some dose of it. And for me, the hardest thing was always disclosing, and we'll go over, the why, the how, the when, and the what. Next slide, please. So why disclose? So with a lot of us, I put most of us, but and probably most of us, there's no avoiding somebody noticing the tics. They're gonna see it. And also apologies in advance if you see some repeating points. It's because it's quite important, I think, to remember. So why else? Tourette syndrome is a big part of our life, physically and mentally, whether we like it or not. And if you're looking for a partner and somebody you're going to spend, your time with, they're going to need to understand that, and they're going to need to understand how to support you, assuming that they're going to be a good partner. And then opposite, I think they deserve to know about anything that may affect your relationship, just as the opposite is also true. That doesn't mean you have to lay out every single thing, that you've got on your mind or in your life right away. But something like this that, we can't just turn off. I think it's it's important that a partner understand exactly, what they're getting into and what to expect. And like I said, how to support you. Next slide, please. So how? We have a lot of options, and I'll elaborate on this. So I tend to break down the how of disclosure kind of to an offensive approach or a defensive approach. And what I mean by that is offensive, just get out ahead of it. So yeah, bring your Tourette's up early so you're on the same page. It's not you sit down and you just boom, my Tourette's, but try to work it in, sooner rather than later, because they're going to notice something's going on. And so an offensive strategy is just to go ahead and just get it out of the way. But you can also wait to address your TS, especially if you have much more mild tics than some of us have, once the other person comments. For a lot of people with Tourette's and tic disorders, they might just have a tiny little eye blink or a nose twitch or something like that, and it might even be, someone may never even notice it. But that being said, I've had friends, or I have friends right now, who I just, I never brought it up, and eventually it came up, and that was fine as well. And then this is something that, if you're comfortable doing so, making light of your TS through humor can be a great way to disclose. That's just kind of how I grew up getting it out there. I was lucky enough to have support, and a fair amount of friends growing up, and you lean into it, and all of a sudden things, in my experience, weren't really, nobody's laughing at you. It's just we're all kind of just enjoying if something funny happens, or if I can make a joke out of it. But once again, that's something that you need to be comfortable doing, and it is no way something that you need to do to disclose. Let's see, next, please. Oh yeah, and I think this is very important. Try not to go into more detail about your Tourette's, at least towards the beginning, than what the situation is calling for. So I'm always personally an open book. I say you can ask me anything you want about it. I'm happy to talk about it and answer questions. But some people, it's like, oh, why do you do that? Or you just say, oh, I have Tourette syndrome. They're like, oh, okay. And they don't ask more questions. And that's, so you don't really need to just start really diving in and going into detail. If they ask questions and you're comfortable answering them, then that's, I think, the situation where you would go deeper and deeper, or however deep they want to know, or that you're comfortable going. But most importantly, do what's best for you based on your experience with your tics and your relationship with your own tics and your Tourette's. Don't be afraid to put yourself out there, but don't go too far out of your comfort zone if it's really going to stress you out or give you anxiety. But one point I want to hammer home, most people are not going to be concerned with your TS, just like lots of people aren't going to be concerned with other mental and physical traits their partners or their friends have. They want to be there to get you, not just something you live with. Next slide, please. So, yeah, disclosure when. So the two most common scenarios, I think, this day and age are what I call in the wild, meaning you just meet somebody while you're out and about, or in a group of friends, or whatever it may be. And then also online dating, which is extremely popular. And I feel like, especially, in cities, it just goes up a notch. So let's look at, if you go to the next slide, please. Let's start with the in the wild, quote unquote. So this is meeting someone in person without prearranging it while you're just out and about. If you're going to be spending some time right then and there, I'd say go back to the house slide. It's like, this is all the different ways you can work it in now. You didn't have any time to prepare. You weren't talking about it before, but hey, it might come up. It might be a good opportunity too. But yeah, what are you most comfortable with? If you want to stay connected, say you meet briefly, you exchange numbers or social media or something like that, and it hasn't come up yet, I wouldn't worry about it. Tell them later while you're chatting or when you meet up next, or if they ask a question about it. Which leads me to my next point. Depending on the length of your encounter at the, quote unquote, in the wild, there's a good chance they've already noticed your tics, even if it doesn't come up. If you keep talking and make arrangements to meet again, then I think that's a good sign. But that can be a great opportunity to disclose. Something I've said several times. It's like, hey, while we were talking earlier, you might have noticed, X, my face twitching or my shoulder jerking. I usually don't have as many vocal tics as I have right now when I'm out in public, but there's all sorts of things. Your tics, your Tourette's. So that's an opportunity to kind of work it in there and disclose. I really think that, and this is obviously not something you can just plan to work out, but meeting people when you're in a group setting with friends can be very advantageous because they get to observe you being you, presumably, interacting with friends and people you know, and a lot of times they'll also see you ticking. So that's like you're disclosing without actually explicitly disclosing, but you're showing off you as a person, your personality, and all of that. And so a lot of times that can really just it's like two birds with one stone. It's out there, and they understand what you're about. Next slide, please. So online, this is something that I've been asked about a lot, and I've talked with people a lot, and it's just because it's just more and more common, people meeting online these days, and for serious relationships. So getting to know each other over the integrated text system and whatever dating app you're using, or you're texting, messaging, that's kind of usually the first step when you meet or match with somebody online. So now what do? Do you just do you tell them about it right off the bat, over text before you ever meet, or do you want to wait till you meet, or maybe do like a FaceTime or a video chat? Do I want to put that I have Tourette syndrome in my dating profile? It can become kind of a stressful thing before anything really even happens. And I've kind of myself learned. I've tried all these different approaches, and I think I can offer some insight. So I find it easiest if you're going to meet up with somebody online that you met online. It's easiest to bring it up for me before meeting them in person, but after a little bit of conversation and getting to know each other. So, I mean, it's almost kind of like that group setting. It's like they're kind of getting to know you, but before, they're just taken by surprise. It's like, oh, okay, yeah, I have Tourette syndrome. This is kind of what it is. And I say that not just doing it right off the bat, which is a perfectly fine approach. I actually dated someone for quite a long time that I had it in my profile, and they just okay acknowledged and moved on. So Tourette's might play a large role in your life, but it doesn't need to be your defining characteristic. So it doesn't need to be like, I'm looking at a profile, Eric Tourette's, okay, that's it. I think it's advantageous to kind of see if you guys click or have similar interests, or take the first step before diving into the disclosure portion. But once again, I'll say it again, there's no wrong way to disclose your Tourette's. Proceed in the manner you're comfortable with based on your understanding and your relationship with your own tics. Next slide, please. So what? How do I go about telling them about my TS when the time comes? And this is, I've already said this, but I think it's important. And this is what I most commonly see myself. It's like, so I like to get out in front of it. If I'm meeting someone for the first time and I haven't told them they have Tourette's, I really just look for that first kind of smooth time to bring it up. Like, oh yeah, and if you notice my face twitching, it's just because I have Tourette syndrome. Or sometimes it'll be a noticeable tic. My knee shot up and hit a table, and I almost spilled my drink. And so I just kind of like, oh yeah, so I have this. That's why that happened. And for me, that's a great time to introduce some humor, I think, into the situation. But those are kind of just, for me, I usually wait. I get right out in front of it, or I just wait for a good time, but I don't like to wait too long, because I think as Dr. Kompoliti mentioned, suppression can really take a lot out of you, and just waiting to disclose and wondering what's going to happen builds up stress and anxiety. And I feel better, and I think a lot of people feel better when they just get it out of the way. Next slide, please. Oh yeah, and this is kind of what I've already talked about, this second to last point. Go into the degree of detail that the situation calls for. No need to go into lots of detail if they're not asking more questions, or if on the other side, if you feel uncomfortable, really diving into it. And one thing I love to stress, and I really believe in it, is don't apologize for having tics or Tourette's. It's not your fault. And I mean, obviously, I've had a tic that maybe, knocked something over. I ran into someone or something like that, and I'll apologize for that. But I think it is very important socially to not apologize for having Tourette's, and really just show, it's something you live with, but you're good. We can move on. It's just my Tourette's. Next slide, please. So this is the big one. Like I said at the beginning, it's what everyone's afraid of, whether you have Tourette's or anything else. But for a lot of us, I know me personally, what took me a while to get over, and in some ways it'll always be there, is if you get rejected, you automatically think it's because of your Tourette's. Could be 100 other things, but our minds often just go right there. So yeah, everybody that dates, unless you ask out one person and then you get married, they're gonna either be rejected, or they're gonna fear being rejected by a potential partner. Like I said, we're really quick to chalk it up to our Tourette's, but like I said, people without Tourette's are rejected all the time. It's just, personality, your manners, your appearance, your job. If you smell bad, it could be a million things. So try not to dwell in that, just thinking it's because you're Tourette's. Just pick yourself up, dust yourself off, get back out there, be yourself. Just like your friends and your family who accept you who you are for your Tourette's, there's partners out there that will too. And to quote one more thing from Dr. Kompoliti's portion, I in my experience, who you do date, you're usually going to get I don't want to say higher quality, but somebody that really is into you for you, because they're just going to cast away this funny thing that we do that we can't hide, that's going to go everywhere that they go, and they see you for yourself. Next slide, please. And then conclusions. Yeah, most people struggle with insecurities that affect their romantic life. You can disclose your Tourette's in a bunch of different ways, but do it how you're comfortable and what the situation calls for. And don't let DS get in the way of you being the person you want to be, or you being the person you are. It can seem scary, but having a romantic life, even with Tourette's, mild, moderate, severe, it's completely possible. And you just gotta go after it. So I believe that's all I had. We can turn it over for questions. Oh yeah, keep trying if you fail.
Okay, thank you, you two. So now we're going to move into the question and answer section of the webinar. The first question comes from Alayanne D. Do you plan dates where tics aren't as noticeable, i.e. a concert or a loud venue versus a movie?
I guess the answer is kind of, but it's really like, well, so I'll say that I did used to do that, but or I have done it in the past, but like I said, I really like to just get that disclosure out there sooner, because I just, it's going to come up, at least for me. There's no way I can completely hide it. And I don't want to be thinking throughout this whole loud event, like, oh God, and then, you know, dreading when we're back in the car or something like that. And then it's, you know, the potential, or the next time we're going to go out, that, you know, I'm going to tick. Like, you can't hide it forever, or at least most of us. And I really like to get it out of the way. But very specifically about that one, I do not plan movie theater dates, because I don't think there's anywhere I'm less comfortable, besides maybe a crowded airplane, than in a movie theater with my tics.
Okay, the next question comes from Roxana B. My husband has Tourette, and he thinks that I am too sensitive to his tics, and he does not make any effort to see a psychologist or do meditation, excuse me, or any mindfulness. He is not open to talking about his tics. I am interested to know your suggestion for someone like me who is getting anxious or maybe annoyed by his tics. Thank you.
Dr.
But
Kompoliti? Yeah,
can I say something about that?
please.
Because maybe Eric is the right person to talk about it, but I've seen a lot of couples come into my office like this, and usually a lot of people with Tourette's, they go through the workday suppressing, and then they go home at night, and home is a sanctuary and should be a sanctuary, and that's when a lot of people release. So the severity of the tics at night, when you hit the couch and unwind for the day, is not necessarily a depiction of the severity of the tics during the day. So I think, you know, just people have the right to unwind and treat home as a sanctuary. But on the other hand, I understand your point. You know, you're human too, and you need a break as well. But just make sure you understand that this is not how the tics are the whole day, most likely. Eric?
Yeah, it's kind of a difficult one. I know from experience, at least when it comes to getting help, when I was younger, I probably cycled through a dozen different medications, none of which worked, and all of which the side effects were way worse than having tics. I did eventually find something that I used to kind of take the edge off. Well, I take a dose that only, you know, takes the edge off, because it affects me, you know, mentally. It makes me very anxious if I take too much. But on the other hand, it is, you know, it's something that you have to live with as well. And I mean, I guess I don't have the best advice there. It's just everybody's sort of different with how they want to approach it, and their past with, you know, being treated. You see it a lot with, you know, with people that have depression too. I have friends and family that, you know, they're not having a good time. It's hurting them, but at the same time, they may not be ready, or they may not be wanting to go get help for a multitude of reasons.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
I mean, it's interesting because a lot of the adults are like you, and they've been through tons of different medications as children, and psychologists and behavioral modification and all this. And then I've seen that when people have a word of their own, and they can decide for themselves, a lot of times they choose not medications. And you know, there is a wrong perception that they're not adults with tics, and that's wrong. And I remember once we had a study for adults with Tourette's, and there was an ad on the radio, and everybody came out of the woods. So people are out there. They're just, I think, sometimes disillusioned with the, what the medical profession has to offer, and it's maybe it's and I think people, when you get to be an adult, you've tried in so many different ways for so many years. It's just that you have to discuss that more with the other side, with the other person. It's maybe it's they can have their safe place, they go away, do their tics, and then understand that you're a person too. You want to have some quiet time in the couch. But I think this is something that has to do with communication more than anything between the two people who have to share like the evening together and the night together after a hard day's work. And this is doable. You just have to be able to articulate your emotions, let the other side know that that's how you feel, because that's another elephant in the room. If you don't do it, then you're not going to get rid of it. It's there.
Okay, and the next question comes from, where did it go? Okay, comes from Lindsay G. Do you have any tips for newlyweds moving forward, one with Tourette's and one without? My comorbid conditions get more in the way than the tics, which affect the relationship more.
I feel like it might be a lot of overlapping with the comments that you just gave, Katie.
Do you want to take,
Unfortunately, I have not been married. But
so I can talk about that. I've been married and divorced.
I feel like it's a lot of the same comments that.
Married.
But yeah, go ahead.
It's a hard thing. It's not so hard. It can be a wonderful thing. It's something that requires a lot of work. Once you get away from the initial, the honeymoon period, so to speak, then you need work. You need to start accepting each other and allowing and growing together, but allowing each other space to grow. And some of the comorbidities, as you said, they can be very difficult to deal with. But it's not that you didn't know. We were not in the era of arranged marriages. That's why people date. That's why people take their time, and you go into it, and you have to take the other person with everything, with all the whole baggage and their family together. So it's a constant negotiation. And that I heard that. I mean, that's not my line, but I just heard the TED Talk the other day, and it was the danger of the single story. None of us is a single story. We're not only our depression. We're not only our tics. We're not only our OCD. We're many more things. We just have to put it all in the table. And if you get to the point of getting married, you've already put it on the table. But then marriage brings a whole new set of problems. And you just have to face them honestly, I think. It's honestly and with respect for each other, and allowing each other space, but trying to grow together. And I know this sounds like generalities, and this is true for everybody, whether you have anxiety or you have Tourette's or have tics or whatever we have, because we all kind of have something, and you bring it to the table, and you have to learn how to deal with it.
And we have one last question. Any questions that we don't get to tonight, I will be emailing you with the answers from the presenter, so please don't think we're going to ignore you. The last question comes from Dan Z. How do you deal with a date that has an insensitive reaction to your disclosure of your Tourette syndrome? And this one is for Eric.
Yes. It sounds like it's Eric.
So, I mean, yeah, that's really unfortunate. I guess it might it might depend on to the degree of insensitivity and whether it comes truly from a place of ignorance, or I should say, like not understanding, and then but if it's that and you can explain it and then it's still a problem, or it was insensitive in a way that was truly meant to be hurtful or put you down, I think it's kind of the same with any insensitive comment you might get on a first date. I think that's probably not the person for you, or a person that you want to be investing your time with, because like I said, if they're not open to learning and accepting what you have to say as what's going on, then it's just not it's not the right person. It's just like a friend. If you have a friend that, well, a quote unquote friend that's making fun of you or putting you down, or poking at your insecurities, that's not a friend. That's not someone you want to be around. So I know it can sometimes be hard to let go of this idea that you have, especially before a first date, about how well it can go, and maybe you really like this person, you've liked them for a while, or whatever. But if it's insensitive from a place that was meant to be insensitive, and not just an errant comment that you can educate them on, and they can apologize and you can move on, then it's probably time to move on from that person.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Eric and Dr. Kompoliti, for speaking on this topic tonight, and thank you to our viewers for tuning in. For those of you that are joining us currently, you will receive a survey in about 1 hour. We encourage you to fill it out. We always like to know how we can improve on our web-based presentations. And we look forward to seeing you at our virtual conference, and that will be May 14th through the 16th. And again, it will be held virtually, and to our supporters, it is free of charge. Have a good night, everyone.
Thanks for coming. Bye-bye.
Thank you.